I want to begin with the larger relationship between the Bible and science. It's very important to understand that the Bible does not intend or desire or try or pretend to position itself as a textbook on science. It doesn't even try to answer the most of the questions that science is asking. This is extremely important to understand because most of the supposed conflicts between science and the Bible come when people try to make the Bible speak outside of its intentions. Adding to that dynamic is that the Bible is a Hebrew book. And let me explain what I mean by that and why that's significant. There's three ways of looking at reality, at least in Western thought. First, there is the Greek way, which is largely descriptive and explanatory. The Greek way of looking at the world has an emphasis on rationality. Aristotle felt that once you had defined something, you had exhausted its essence. When you approach something with Greek questions, you tend to be searching for shape and substance and definition. So you would approach water and ask, okay, well, what is water? What does it look like? What does it feel like? It's all description. That's the Greek way. A second way of looking at reality could be termed the Latin way, which is primarily concerned with methodology, with method. A Latin question would ask, how does this thing work? How do we do this? What were or are the steps involved? Now, most of us tend to look at the world in Greek and Latin ways because if you're from the West, you come from a Greek and Latin culture. So it's natural that we take our Greek and Latin questions to the Bible. The problem is you can't always ask Greek or Latin questions of the Bible because it's not a Greek or Latin book with a Greek or a Latin worldview. It's Hebrew, which is an entirely different way of looking at reality. The Hebrew mind was concerned with what a thing is for and does it work. It was matters of use and utility and value. That was what was paramount to the Hebrew mind. Now, bring this to the Bible and science. We come to a book like Genesis and we find that it says two main things about creation. Just two. God did it and it was good. That's it. That's pretty much what you find in Genesis. Let me give you a taste of how it reads, okay? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. God called the space sky. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the second day. And on it goes, just like that. On the third day, God created the land and the seas and the plants. On the fourth day, the sun and the moon and the stars. On the fifth day, the fish and the birds. On the sixth day, the animals of the earth, as well as the first human beings. Let me read that part to you. It says, "So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." And then when it was all said and done, here was the final declaration. God looked over all that he made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, morning came, marking the sixth day. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. There you have it. God did it, and it was good. That's pretty much it. Now, if you're Greek or Latin inclined, you want to know how God did it. Genesis doesn't tell us how God did it, only that he did it. Why? It's a Hebrew book. That's why, that's what drives us crazy sometimes, because we're still saying, but I want my Greek and Latin answers to my Greek and Latin questions. Well, get used to disappointment. But some don't want to get used to disappointment. So they do one of a couple of things. They force the Bible to be something it's not and force it to answer things it doesn't. And that's what creates the conflict that people think exists between science and the Bible. For example, people who read Genesis through a Greek or Latin lens read that God created the heavens and earth in 6 days, and then immediately interpret that as a succession of 24-hour solar days with scientific precision. And from that, they use the histories and the genealogies in the Bible and calculate that the age of the earth is around 6,000 years old, which would mean that all of the scientific evidence of the Big Bang happening about 14 billion years ago and the earth being about 4.5 billion years old has to be wrong. That the light we see coming from stars billions of light years away, the geological stratigraphy that we see in places like the Grand Canyon, ranging from 200 million to 2 billion years ago, the age of the fossils of the dinosaurs, it all has to be either ignored or dismissed by spending incredible amounts of energy on scientifically dubious theories that try to explain it all away in light of a supposed young earth. Or others just use the conclusion of how to read the Bible as a reason to reject what it says and dismiss the Bible altogether. And so they use it to say, oh, see, it says 6 24-hour days, and we know that's screwy, so the whole Bible's screwy. And now, while there are some people who do read the Bible that way, who are Christians, not many but some, the vast majority of Christians do not. And when people use that reading to discount the Bible, they're not reading it at face value either. They're distorting it by reading it through a Greek or a Latin lens and creating this artificial conflict with science. Because in no way, shape, or form does reading the Bible make you hold to a young earth view, and for very good reason. The mention of 7 days was just an ancient poetic way of talking about the fact that God did it. People who try to make it a scientific statement about 7 literal 24-hour solar days, making the age of the universe at around 6,000 years, which flies in the face of everything science has discovered, simply aren't reading the text carefully. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, aren't you guys supposed to be taking it literally? I mean, I kind of heard, isn't that what you Christians are supposed to be doing with the Bible? And I would say, absolutely. But that's not taking it literally enough. To read the Bible literally simply means you read it the way it was intended to be read. That means you take it the way it was written in accordance with its genre, in light of its language and the time in which it was written and authorial intent. If you take Genesis 1 and 2 literally, meaning as it was actually written, then you have to read it as poetic description because that's what it was. That was its genre. I mean, you just read it with me yourself. That wasn't trying to be a scientific treatise. I mean, how could God have wanted to inspire the writer to have that language be considered scientifically precise about literal 24-hour solar days when, according to the text, the sun and the moon weren't even created until the 4th day? You couldn't have even had a 24-hour solar day until the 4th day because there was nothing in existence to be solar with. The word used in the original Hebrew language for day, when it uses the word day, it's the Hebrew word yom. Which, while it can mean a 24-hour solar day, it can also mean a segment of time, anywhere from weeks to years to several years to an age, even an era. We use the word day in a similar fashion now. We talk about our grandfather's day, or we talk about days gone by. I mean, the use of the word day, use of the word yom in Genesis, could have stood for any period of time, even indefinite periods. It was a literary device, not a scientific declaration. The days in Genesis were probably indefinite periods of time, differing geologic eras that could have been millions of years in length, allowing for everything from the dinosaurs to the Ice Age. So the supposed tension between the Bible and science in regard to the age of the earth is really a red herring. It's just non-existent. Nothing in the Bible would go to war or teach against the universe being about 13.8 billion years old and the Earth about 4.5 billion years old, which are currently the best estimates of science. Now let's talk about evolution. Because the Bible also says that God created the human race, beginning with an original Adam and an original woman, Eve, and this is not figurative language. And that was, according to the Bible's genealogies, about 6,000 years ago. Now let's talk about that. Here's the real divide when it comes to evolution. It's the divide between a naturalistic view of the universe that sees nature as all that there is, and a theistic view of the universe that remains very much open to the existence and activity of God and believes in the existence and activity of a God interacting with the universe. In other words, do you have a creative process, therefore, without a God, or a creative process with a God? That's the real question. Now, evolution is obviously the leading theory in science for the how, which, if you're a Christian and you believe in the Bible, fine. It's fine. I mean, it's not a big deal. If God used evolution as part of his creative process, so be it. That doesn't mean there wasn't an original Adam and Eve that God breathed an actual soul into at the end of the process to mark the beginning of the human race as we know it today, much less that there wasn't a God guiding the entire process. The real question is whether something like the theory of evolution explains away God as a creative force or almost by necessity pulls him into the picture. Well, let me go ahead and give you a shocker to think about. I believe the more you look at evolution, in light of all that we know about science, the more the theory of evolution itself makes one of the strongest cases for the existence of God I know of. Let me see if I can make my point. Let's begin with the timeline. While the age of the universe is around 14 billion years, the age of the Earth is about 4.5 billion. But life didn't exist 4.5 billion years ago. It couldn't. It was a geologically violent time. There was consistent bombardment from meteorites, and the Earth itself had to cool and its surface solidify to a crust. Life on Earth, the latest and best scientific thinking goes, began about 3.8 billion years ago in the form of single-celled prokaryotic cells such as bacteria. Multicellular life didn't come into play until over 1 billion years later. It's only in the last 570 million years that the kind of life forms we're familiar with even began to evolve, starting with arthropods, followed by fish 530 million years ago, and then land plants 470 million years ago, and forests 385 million years ago. Mammals didn't evolve until just 200 million years ago, and our own species, Homo sapiens, the thinking goes, only 200,000 years ago, at least in terms of DNA makeup. So humans have been around for a mere 0.004% of Earth's history. Okay, that's the evolutionary time frame. That's also the evolutionary problem. Now, the whole idea behind naturalistic evolution is that it's a product of time plus chance. That's not enough time. It's not enough time for the Earth to cool and life to be produced naturalistically by chance. The former Plumian professor of astrophysics at Cambridge University, Sir Fred Hoyle, determined that if you would compute the time required to get all 200,000 amino acids for one human cell to come together by chance, it would be 293 times the estimated age of the Earth. That's what it would take. Even further, Hoyle, along with one of his other colleagues, calculated the odds for all of the functional proteins necessary for a one-cell animal to form in one place by random events. They came up with the figure of 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. That's 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Since there's only about 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire universe, Hoyle and his team concluded this was an outrageously small possibility that could not be faced even if the whole universe consisted of organic soup. For the timeline to work, it would be like having the working dynamics of the latest iPhone along with the entire corporate campus of Apple that produced it to be instantly created by chance through a single explosion in a computer geek's garage. So if you're going to embrace the theory of evolution, you would also need to embrace seemingly some kind of outside, guiding, enhancing force that sped it along miraculously and guided it strategically in the time frame of the age of the Earth. But even if there wasn't enough time, or perhaps you want to buy into mutations and evolutionary leaps filling all of the time gaps, you have the problem of the initial complexity of life. Darwin himself said that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, his entire theory would break down. Biochemist Michael Behe speaks of Darwin's self-challenge in terms of a mousetrap. He said the common mousetrap includes, the platform, the hammer, the catch, the spring, and the holding bar. Each one of those components is required for the mousetrap to function as a mousetrap. You can't start with just a wooden base and catch a few mice and then add a bar and catch a few more and just functionally evolve into the current design, step by Darwinian step, into the most effective mousetrap. Take away any of those 5 parts, there's no mice being caught. The conclusion is that the mousetrap was somehow made as an intact system. It could not have just evolved into that system. It had to have been designed as a system for that purpose. Now, what does this have to do with our conversation? Well, this is exactly what molecular biology has found. The basic forms of life from which evolution began were not simple. They were irreducibly complex molecular machines that cannot be explained by natural selection working on variation. I mean, think about something like the human eye. According to evolutionary theory, it would have started with a simple, light-sensitive spot and then evolved to what we see with today. The problem is that when we finally got to the point where we were able to study life at the molecular level, we found it wasn't simple like that. It was irreducibly complex, which means something or someone had to create those first complex systems from which all of life evolved. Something or someone had to create, for example, with the eye, that first light-sensitive spot, because it couldn't have come into existence by itself, because that first light-sensitive spot itself was irreducibly complex. It wasn't simple. Now, you can start with simple and get to complex, which is what evolutionary theory maintains, but you can't start complex. But we found that that's exactly what would have had to have happened. Behe, as a biochemist, concluded that the result of recent research into life at the molecular level is a very loud cry for intelligent design. That's not all there is to think about when it comes to whether there's a God-shaped hole in all things related to evolution. How did a purely naturalistic evolutionary process ever create increasing diversity? Now, this is terribly important. In other words, the idea of macroevolution, which is one species evolving from a totally different species. Now, this is very different than microevolution, which is just changes or adaptations within a species. Microevolution is like a dog breeder who breeds a dog that sheds less hair. It's still a dog. What they can't do is breed a dog that is a bird or that flies. And that's what naturalistic theory, though, says happened. That microevolution somehow led to macroevolution. That single-cell bacteria led to multi-cell bacteria. And multi-cell bacteria led to spiders. And spiders somehow led to fish. And fish somehow led to plants. And plants somehow led to mammals. And it all eventually led to us. When it comes to the science of that, how one species creates a completely different species is at best vague. I've saved the biggest and most crucial area to think about for last. The beginning of life itself. You can't just say that life exists because 3.8 billion years ago it began evolving from a single-celled prokaryotic cell. Evolutionary theorists have to ask, how did those first bacteria come to life? This is a very profound question. How did life come from non-life? Now, you can say that within chemically rich liquid oceans, organic molecules transition to self-replicating life, but that's like saying your SUV became Optimus Prime after it went through a car wash. It doesn't just happen. So what is the leading theory of how this is all solved outside of a God bringing that life? This might surprise you, but one of the leading ideas is called panspermia. The idea that the first life, along with that initial beginning complexity that had to be there, was seeded here from another planet, such as Mars. Okay, what does that solve? Nothing. If all the scientific challenges surrounding life beginning on its own on Earth attempts to be solved by saying that life began somewhere else and got here on the back of a meteorite, how did that life start there? You have the exact same set of questions. It's like they aren't even trying to think this one through. So the real decision is not between creation and evolution. It's not between theism and it's not between creation and evolution. It's between theism and naturalism. That's the real divide between nature did it and God did it. You can easily be a theistic evolutionist, or you can be a naturalistic evolutionist. But the evidence would make being the naturalistic evolutionist the greater leap of faith. At every turn, evolutionary theory cries out for the intervention, the guiding hand, the help of an outside intelligent force. In other words, the more you look at the theory of evolution, the more you say, man, if this is true, there was a God involved.